Why do you seem so scared? All I wanted to do was play with you.
Welcome to Terror Tracks, hosted by best-selling horror author Jack Pierce. We publish new episodes every Monday at 2 a.m. EST. Go to terrortracks.com/shop if you would like to support the show, and follow us on social media at terrortracks.com/follow. Enjoy the show.
Welcome back. This week, we will be reviewing Tale of the Nightly Neighbors. Are the neighbors next door vampires or not? Coming up next, though, we have a new episode of Under a Morning Star titled School's Out. This is probably the most terrifying chapter of the entire book, in my opinion, but there are quite a few terrifying chapters after Norcastle, so you be the judge of that. But this is one of my personal favorites, and when I wrote this, I even questioned if I should put it in the book because it was just too scary and too dark, but you may enjoy it. So I will see you in a moment.
Chapter 7. School's Out. We walked back uptown towards the school. We walked past the old neighborhoods, the houses all abandoned, foreclosed, or for sale. Nobody was left in Norcastle. It was depressing. What happened to all the survivors? I asked. They moved away. They didn't want to be next on the chopping block. The real estate market collapsed, and all the rich folks went broke. You couldn't give the houses away. We arrived outside of the schoolhouse. The sound of children playing and laughing came from the distance. You said that everyone left. Where did the kids come from? I asked. I don't know. I've never seen them before, Mike said. Stay behind me. I have a bad feeling about this place. We ascended the stairs and the double-glass doors opened on their own with a shrill, ear-piercing squeal. In the distance, the children laughed, sang, and played. Norcastle Elementary brought me back to a terrible time in my life. I hated this place with a passion. I never did well in school, and the teachers were all abusive to the children, especially me. They beat us with rulers and locked us in the closet if we misbehaved. Our parents never did anything about it. It was a wretched place. I always felt the parents didn't care at all. They were happy to have us out of the house so they could gallivant and make love. One court case did come along about the principal possibly molesting a little girl. It never went to trial, though. The official statement from the police chief was not enough evidence. Even when I was a kid, well before my days as a beat cop in Drova, I knew it was a load of bullshit. The school had the layout of a maximum security prison block. The classrooms were all in a circle with the faculty watching from the center office pillars. During class, I felt the leering eyes of the principal watching us like a hawk. When we were beaten, he licked his lips with joy and envy. He was a true sadist. He would come to the classrooms every so often and stare in the window at us. His big, beady eyes almost popped out of his head when the teachers beat us. We were the prisoners, and the teachers were the guards. The place haunted my nightmares for over a decade. I knew I wasn't alone in the feeling that this place felt like a prison. Lousy food, strict rules, and the faculty never punished the teachers for their abusive actions. Deep down, I always thought they welcomed it, or to an extreme extent, enjoyed it sexually. Within these walls, countless children came screaming in agony, begging their parents not to make them come here. We called out to the children, but there was no reply. The sound of footsteps in the snow came from around the corner. I stood against the wall and drew my pistol and waited. Was that demon here with us now? I waited and told Mike not to make a sound. The footsteps stopped. Did you hear that? I asked. Hear what? Those footsteps. No. We should keep going. We continued down the hall, and I watched every corner waiting for that faceless demon to appear. Every so often, I'd signal for Mike to halt as I looked around a corner. I was tense. I wasn't sure if it was from being back in this hellhole or from the entire trip back to this wretched town. We came upon a hallway filled with classrooms. The lights flickered, and the lockers in the hall were covered in rust. I dragged my fingers across the lockers, and black soot rubbed off in my hand. I signaled for Mike to wait outside while I checked the room ahead. The room was full of kids sitting at their desks listening while a teacher read from a textbook. The teacher's mouth moved, but no sound came out. I pulled the clip out of my gun to check how many shots I had left. 7 rounds left. I entered the room, and all of the kids and teacher gave me a blank, cold stare. The teacher turned around and wrote on the chalkboard. With each drag of the chalk, it sounded like nails digging into the board. The letters spelled out, "Murderer." She glared at me. Her black eyes pierced through my soul, and her face grew pale white. The kids stood up, unsheathing knives, and slowly walked toward me. I drew my gun, and the teacher let out a high-pitched shriek that knocked me back. I laid on the floor as Mike ran the check on me. "Shut the door! Now!" I yelled. Mike slammed the door shut, but it flew open again with the teacher drawing closer to me. "Grab that mop! Right there!" I yelled. Mike ran down the hall and grabbed the mop out of a janitor's bucket, and I fired 2 shots into the teacher's chest. She shrieked again, coming closer to the door, and I stood up, slammed the door, and blocked it with the mop's handle. The door shook from the inside. I kept my weapon zeroed in on it, but the shaking came to a stop after a few seconds. What did they mean by that? I am not a murderer. My job is to hunt them down. All of the doors to the classrooms throughout the hall flew open simultaneously. Shit. We gotta go. We ran down the hall and looked into the various classrooms, seeing students at their desks and teachers at the front of the classes frozen. A strange sound emanated from the rooms. It collected into what seemed like a choir of whispers, recorded on a tape deck, then played in reverse. No one in the rooms moved, or even breathed at all, as if they were all frozen in time. We found a large metal door near the end of the hall. It was locked, and I fired a shot into the knob, knocking it off. Inside, we came to a stairwell. The stairs had a maroon rubber padding on them. The sign on the wall read, "Ground floor." One staircase led up to the second floor and the other down to the basement. The basement level was concrete and dark. I couldn't see anything down there. The rest of the stairwell was not much better. The fluorescent bulbs flickered on and off. Not a rapid flicker, it was more akin to a pulse. As we ascended the stairs, the walls started out white, but as we climbed higher, they became darker and rougher. We reached the second floor, and I stacked up against the door. "Whatever happens, stay behind me," I said. Mike nodded. I checked the door. It was unlocked. "Get ready. 3, 2, 1, I said, throwing open the door and checking both sides of the hall. No movement, no sound, nothing except the dead air around us. "Careful," Mike said. I looked back at him and crouched down, waiting for something to come as we heard a faint noise in the distance. We walked down the hall, watching every corner and every door. The silence was broken as I heard the sound of snowy footsteps coming from far away. "Wait," I said, holding up my hand, scoping the area. I looked back at Mike to check his position. "Rick, I don't—" Before he could finish, the faceless demon appeared behind him. It grabbed him. The wraith held its pale hand over Mike's mouth and smiled. Before I could do anything, they both vanished. I slammed my fist against the lockers. A rage built inside of me. My hands trembled, and I fell to my knees. "What do you want with me? Come out and fight me like a man," I yelled, slamming my fist against the lockers. "You want to play games? You want to fuck with me? Come out and show yourself. Yeah, you're really tough with your disappearing act. Come on, come get me." No response. I continued down the hall, trying to pull myself together. My heartbeat shot up rapidly. I gasped for breath, closed my eyes, and focused on the mission. If I broke the case, I hoped all the memories, visions, whatever you call them, would leave me forever. I walked into my old classroom from 5th grade. It was covered in soot, and the children sat frozen in place. None moved or even made a sound. The teacher seemed to be flesh and blood. Her long blonde hair flowed down past her shoulders. She wore a blue sweater along with a long, flowery skirt. "Miss, please, tell me what's going on," I said. No reply. "I don't have time for games. Now answer me." I grabbed the woman by her shoulder. She looked back at me and cried. I felt her skin fall away and become small particles of ash in my hands. The kids glared at me with glowing yellow eyes. They sang Ring Around the Rosie inside my head. When ashes, ashes, we all fall down came, they all turned into piles of ash. I felt faint. I sat at the teacher's desk contemplating what to do, and if this was all in my head. There had to be a logical explanation. I pulled out my phone and dialed Dr. Moore's number. 396-555-3813. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. I dialed the number again, even faster. Same result. The quack gave me the wrong number. Maybe he wanted me to come here so I would stop coming to him every week asking about these crazy panic attacks and nightmares. I left the classroom and collapsed onto the floor, sweating, gasping for breath, and my heart pounded faster than it ever had before. I looked over at the principal's office across the hall. Principal Hurley stood in his office with a little girl. He looked down at her with that sadistic grin of his with his hand on her shoulder. "Well, Miss Lopez, you have done very well in Miss Clarence's class. Maybe we can arrange for you to skip a grade," Hurley said. The girl smiled up at him with stars in her eyes. He walked her into his office. The door closed and I heard him groan. It sounded like a groan of pleasure. I always knew that son of a bitch was a child molester. I ran and slammed my shoulder into the door repeatedly. No use. "Open the door, Hurley!" I yelled. Hurley laughed. "To hell with you!" I kicked the door repeatedly, but no use. Hurley laughed and groaned with pleasure. I fired 2 shots into the doorknob, but no use. It sat there unscathed. My old shop teacher, Mr. Robinson, came from the shop class with a can of gasoline. He smiled at me and walked toward the principal's door. "No, stop!" I said, aiming at him. Robinson kept moving toward the door. He poured gasoline from Hurley's door all the way into the hallway and faded away slowly. I turned back to the principal's door and kicked it open. The door flew off the hinges. Hurley and the girl were gone. The entire room was scorched, blackened with soot. I turned around and saw children exiting the homerooms holding knives up coming towards me. It was just like my dream. The fire spread across the walls and ceiling. "Shit, here we go again," I said. I ran through the halls, seeing the faces of children melting away, crying a whisper as they faded into the ether. I got to the stairwell, jumped over the railing, and tried to go through the door leading to the ground floor. It was welded shut. I kicked it repeatedly, trying to break it down, but it was no use. The fire and decay drew closer and closer. I jumped over the other railing and entered the basement, slamming the door behind me. I scoped around the basement looking for a way out. Complete darkness. I used my lighter to try and find the light switch. I found an old water heater disconnected and toppled over, covered in rust. I felt around for the light switch. As I dragged my fingers along the walls, it felt like rusted scrap metal. The pain was intense as the metal scraped against my fingertips. I found a light switch and only one overhead light turned on. Its dim glow did little to illuminate the room. A loud pounding on the door behind me came. It wouldn't have been long before those kids and the fire got inside with me. I had to get out. I ran further into the basement, with my gun drawn, aimed at the ceiling. A Beatles song began to play in the distance. I recognized it as Here Comes the Sun. The sound bounced off the walls, creating a tremendous echo. I liked the song as a kid, but right now I felt it was a tad ironic. There was only one person in my memory that played Beatles. That was Mr. Farsi, the janitor. I kept walking until I saw him sweeping the floor. 4 kids sat in the corner playing with toys. Mr. Farsi was the only cool adult in the school. He was always kind to us, but boy, did he have a temper. He'd constantly shout at something or someone when there was no one there. He was schizophrenic, but harmless nonetheless. He looked up at me and stopped sweeping. The kids all looked at me nervously. "Hey, boy, I remember you. 3rd grade detention for a week was helping me clean the bathrooms," Farsi said. "Yeah, it's been a while, Mr. Farsi." Farsi scowled, moved toward me, and pushed me back toward the wall. "It's mine. You hear me? You can't have it. Get away from it," Farsi yelled. "What are you talking about? Let go of me." The boombox played a loud buzzing noise. It sounded like it ate the tape. The faceless wraith appeared again. He stuck out his tongue and hissed at us. The decay stretched behind him as he walked toward us. The kids all screamed, and I covered my ears as Farsi continued yelling at the top of his lungs. "I'm stronger than you. It belongs to me. It's mine. Mine. You can't have it," Farsi yelled, running toward the wraith. The two embraced, and the wraith smiled as they both disappeared. I saw an opening in the back of the basement and ran for it, smashing through the door, landing outside. I looked back at the school, and it was entirely boarded up. I caught my breath, and a thought crossed my mind. Had Mr. Farsi been fighting that thing all those years? Also, I remember reading in the papers he shot himself in the basement when I was 13. How was he down there?
Welcome back, everyone, to another review of Are You Afraid of the Dark? This week it's going to be The Tale of the Nightly Neighbors. Once again, there's no intro music. I know that I bring that up every week, but it's true. This episode came right after one of the best episodes of the entire show's history, which I kind of fanboyed about last week, which was The Tale of the Captured Souls. Did they go and make another classic? Because there's a clip from this episode that became a huge part of the trailer for the show, that every time you see someone flash back to Are You Afraid of the Dark, there's a clip from this episode in that trailer or commercial, whatever you want to call it. Did this episode one-up the Captured Souls, or did it flop? Unfortunately, we're right back into the Clovervoltia territory. Oh my God. Okay, so remember when I said that the Phantom Cab was bad because they had a story that made no sense, and it just had a lot of, sort of moving parts where they kind of just, mix things together, and it just didn't work. And then after that, they had one that was pretty solid but straightforward, and then they had the two episodes back to back, which were The Tale of the Twisted Claw and The Tale of the Hungry Hounds. And if you remember how I feel about those, this is another one, unfortunately. So what's the whole story here? I can sum it up in literally 2 sentences. That's how simple, predictable, and boring this episode was. Are the neighbors from Ukraine that just moved in next door vampires or not? The kid is, but the other 2 aren't. The end. That's the entire episode. They literally took about 100 different Twilight Zone episodes from over the years, the 60s, and I think there's a series in the 80s, and just copied it. There are just so many episodes of the Twilight Zone that took the same sort of premise, but it's just, they're going to be vampires. And even Goosebumps took this sort of thing where instead of vampires, it was next door, is there a werewolf or not? And yeah, there was a werewolf. It was stupid, and it was dumb in this one too. Now, I know what you're saying, Jack, it's a children's show. It was a show for kids. You just nostalgic about it. Your nostalgia goggles, all of that. No. I say this every week. The Captured Souls, Station 109.1, The Renegade Virus, The Tale of the 13th Floor, Dead Man's Float, The Tale of the Door Unlocked, The Tale of the Dream Machine. There are so many episodes that show you that this is not really a kid's show to begin with. It really isn't. Because if it was a kid's show, think about kids' shows. No one ever dies in a kid's show. They always get knocked out or fainted, or, they blast off again like in Pokemon. In the second episode of this series, that little girl ran upstairs unable to speak and died. In the third episode with Zebo, he died in a fire. This show has had plenty of characters die in horrible ways, including one which was The Tale of the Prom Queen, where a girl got hit by a car and the guy committed suicide after he found out that she died. This show gets way too dark for just regular kids. Sure, it has teenagers in it, but I don't consider this strictly a kid's show, so I hold it up against its peers, The Twilight Zone, Tales from the Crypt, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, all of those. And this episode is just bad. It had a few points that were decent, which were like, the camera work was nice. They always really get the camera work spot on for me. The acting wasn't too awful, but it just falls in that boring tier of, you saw how complicated and wonderful they could make something like The Captured Souls, but then they go and do this right after. Maybe they just burned out. Maybe they didn't have enough fuel in the tank. This one, final rating, 4 out of 10. Honestly, I feel like they already gave you the ending anyway, because if you've ever seen the trailer for this show or any of the sort of Nickelodeon flashback commercials, they always show you the kid that's in the coffin with the vampire fangs. They always show you that clip every single time. So this story really is pointless, like completely pointless. But luckily, the next episode is another God tier one where they picked up their game again. And next week, we're going to talk about the tale of the dark music. That's going to be a great one. And I would like to actually skip over that one really quick and actually do episode 10 now, just so I can get that out of the way and not waste a week after that, because episode 10 is pretty much awful too. So let's go ahead and get that out of the way too. Jake and the Leprechaun. I watched it. I don't know what I watched. It was just a big mess. It was stupid, and there's really no review to it. 0 out of 10. It was just a dumb story where they did more than the Phantom Cab did, with even worse acting, and it just made no sense. Like, I can't even explain what the plot was, because I don't think it had a plot. It was something about a leprechaun and trying to turn this kid into a frog for some reason, and potions, and somehow like stuff on stage came to become real or something. It just didn't make any sense at all. It was just a big mess. And the reason that I'm taking that episode out early is because after that one, we get another all-time classic, which was one of my favorites of all time, The Tale of the Super Specs. And I've been waiting all season to finally get to that one too. So hopefully we got the bad ones out of the way. There might be one more bad one in this first season, but there's a lot more good coming, because I feel like the writers finally kind of got a grip and were like, you know what? Let's just have some fun with this and not just write generic crap. They got a lot better. All right, everybody. Thank you for listening. If you would like to book me on your podcast or just get in contact with me, period, jack@terrortracks.com. I'm doing a podcast tour. I don't really have set dates and times. Just send me a pitch for your show, I guess, or send me a link to your show and offer up some times, and maybe we can work something out. We'll see. Thanks for listening. terrortracks.com/shop. and minds.com/jackpiercebooks if you want to follow me on there, because I don't really use Twitter anymore. All right, folks. Thanks for listening. You have a wonderful night. Sweet dreams, everyone.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to follow us, go to terrortracks.com/follow. Also, please check out our Patreon, where you can get cool merch, writing lessons, and other awesome rewards starting at $5 a month at patreon.com/terrortracks. See you next week. Goodbye for now.